Which players have fallen the most in dynasty value over the last month? We'll talk about that in today's video. As always, make sure to give us a like and a subscribe. I think we're about 20 subscribers away when recording this video from 800. Help us get there. And if you like dynasty content, make sure you are subscribed because we have a lot of dynasty content coming out. We're going to do some dynasty price checks on players. We're going to do rookie scouting, mock drafts, all that fun stuff. And make sure to join our Discord. Link is in the description. If you get in our Discord, and we have enough people, we're going to start setting up some dynasty leagues in the off season with our listeners. So make sure to get in there. It is free to join. Dynasty fallers. Now, I've made this video. You've probably already seen it, or maybe you haven't, but check it out if you haven't. Dynasty risers. At the beginning of the month, I like to look at, even during the offseason, I like to look at which players are moving up and down. I think as dynasty managers, it's really important that we stay on top of, the market and how people are feeling about certain players, because that's how we kind of capitalize on buying low and selling high. Starting off with the quarterback position, we're starting off with Mr. C.J. Stroud. Only 2 spots here. The quarterback position doesn't have a lot of volatility in general. So, moving down 2 spots, I guess, is significant when you go from a top 5 to a top 7 guy, maybe. C.J. Stroud's not having a good year in terms of what we expected heading into this year. He's QB 15 on the year. He's averaging 14.6 points per game. That is definitely not what we expected after his amazing rookie campaign. And there's a couple things here that I think are important to note. The more and more I play fantasy football, the more and more I realize, you need a rushing floor as a quarterback to be a consistent quarterback and to be a difference-making quarterback. Even the best quarterback in the NFL, arguably, Patrick Mahomes, is kind of been mediocre the last couple of years for fantasy, right? Last year, Patrick Mahomes, he was fine, but he was the QB 8 overall, 18.4 points, the QB 12 in points per game. He was a low-end QB 1. This year, same thing, Mahomes, QB 9, QB 12 in points per game. He's kind of a low-end QB 1. He's the best quarterback in the NFL, and he's a lower-end QB 1 because he doesn't give you an amazing rushing floor. He gives you an okay rushing floor. And we're seeing that with C.J. Stroud, who runs even less than Mahomes, to be honest. And we see it with Herbert the last couple of years. We just see it with these non-rushing quarterbacks that their ceiling is kind of like low-end QB1. Every now and then they'll have that outlier, top 5 season. Joe Burrow is kind of doing that this year. So it's possible, but it's just way less reliable. So just remember that when it comes to quarterbacks and value in quarterbacks. I think C.J. Stroud is still going to be good. I think they fixed that offensive line. He still has weapons. He did miss Nico the last for a good chunk of the season. So I still believe in Stroud and that he deserves to be a top 7 guy. Next up here, we have Kirk Cousins, who's fallen from 23 to 30, and man, has he looked bad this year. He basically has 3 games this year, and that's it. He's the QB 26 in total points. He's averaging about the same as Mr. C.J. Stroud here in points per game, 14.4. And you really break down Kirk Cousins' stats, and you take out those Tampa Bay Bucks games, which I know he played them, and you got to give them to him. But Tampa Bay, one of the worst passing defenses in the entire NFL. You take out those games, he threw 8 touchdowns and over almost 800 yards in those 2 games. You take out those 2 games, and he has 2,200 yards and 9 touchdowns in 10 games. He's averaging 220 yards passing and less than a touchdown a game if you take out those Buccaneers games. And really, he has really 3 games this year because he also played Dallas, who's also a bad defense, especially at that time. And he threw for 220 and 3. So literally 11 of his 17 touchdowns came in 3 games. That means he has 6 touchdowns in the 9 other games. That's really bad, guys. 4 games with 0 touchdowns. I'm curious what they do here. They're in the playoff hunt. I think they're leading their division at 6-6 because it's a bad division. I don't see them moving away from Cousins as long as they're in the playoff hunt, unless Cousins is horrendous like he was against the Chargers. But if he's just solid, 220 and 1, I think, and they're competitive, I think they keep him. I'm wondering what they do next year because they are invested in him. They are invested in him to a certain extent for next year. And I just wonder, like, are we kind of, we should have been putting more stock into the Achilles injury and that he really needed a year to come back from that. And next year he's going to be better. They're paying him, their cap hit next year for Cousins is 40 million, like I see them at least going into the season, giving him a chance, unless like Penix is just amazing. So interesting to see what happens there. Sam Darnold, I'm not 100% sure why Darnold's moved down. It's not a significant move here from 21 to 24. But Sam Darnold this year is the QB9 in points per game. He's the QB9 in points per game, QB8 in total points. He's averaging 18.1 points per game. He's averaging more than guys like Bo Nix, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Jared Goff. Like, Sam Darnold's been awesome this year. And if you are new to this channel and you need a reason to subscribe, go all the way back in January of 2023, or sorry, of this year, 2024. And I was telling people that we need to stash Sam Darnold. We need to stash Sam Darnold, that he's going to be, or maybe it was when he signed with the Vikings, but I was basically championing for, I was saying that I think Sam Darnold, there's a good chance that he is the starter for the Vikings. This is when they signed with him, I guess, back in March. And did I think it was going to turn out this good? No, but I did think he was going to be solid because of the system, because of Minnesota and things like that. So he's been awesome this year. He's almost thrown for 3,000 yards and 23 touchdowns in 12 games. So he's going to get close. He's going to get to 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. So I'm very curious also. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that they're just moving on to JJ McCarthy next year, because one, McCarthy had a setback, right? McCarthy had a setback. And two, they didn't get to see what McCarthy was. Like, they saw him in practice and stuff, but they didn't get to see McCarthy in any real-time game. They don't know what they have in him. They don't know what they have in him. And they are currently, 10-2, one game behind the Lions, who's, the clear-cut best team in the NFL for a lot of people. They're one game behind them for the division. So I don't know, man. Like, if they win a couple games in the playoffs, or they make it to the divisional round even, and competitive in the divisional round in a loss, I could see them bringing back Darnold on a very similar contract that the Bucs did with Baker Mayfield, where it was a multi-year contract, but it was essentially a one-year contract saying, look, prove it one more year for us. If you're the real deal, then we get you at a kind of a bargain. And if you're not, we can cut our losses. It was very smart by the Bucs. I could see the Vikings doing that. I really could. Vikings are kind of like in a win now mode. They're not a rebuilding team. I don't see them just automatically going to an unknown quarterback who they really don't know anything about him, and he's essentially a rookie next year. Last one here is Daniel Jones from 30 to 34. Only thing I want to say about Daniel Jones, and this could be part of the Vikings thinking as well. Can Daniel Jones be their guy next year if Sam Darnold's if they're going to be outpriced of Sam Darnold? We've seen now many guys, Darnold as an example, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, who flame out in their first job, who become decent in their next starting job. Maybe it was just New York and it wasn't working there, right? I know Daniel Jones is kind of different because he had a long time in New York. It's not like he only had a couple years like some of these other guys. But I wouldn't be surprised if, like, in a couple years or something, we're hearing about Daniel Jones and he's like, oh, yeah, in Dynasty talks, like, he's a solid top 15 to 20 quarterback in fantasy, right? Because he gets the starting job for someone. So I still think he's a hold, and definitely a buy, maybe as a throw-in piece in a trade. If you can get him, I still think we're going to see Daniel Jones in the next couple of years. So moving on to some running backs here. Breece Hall from 3 to 5. Again, not a huge drop-off, but significant enough. And it's been disappointing for Breece Hall. He's actually going to miss this. By the way, I am recording this Sunday the morning before Week 14 starts. So if something happens in Week 14 and I don't talk about it, that's why. But Breece Hall and the Jets in general have been a disappointment. He's going to miss this week. I'm just looking at Breece Hall's stats now. In the last 5 games, he's only gone over 90 total yards once. That's not what we were expecting. We were expecting consistently over 100 total scrimmage yards. He has 2 touchdowns in the last 5 games. He's doing work in the passing game and stuff like that. man, this whole Jets situation is just toxic. I don't know how it gets fixed. I really don't. I don't know where they go with the quarterback position. I still believe Brees is one of the best running backs in the NFL, but at this point, we're going on year 4 next year, and we haven't seen the top tier season from Brees that we were expecting. So it's been disappointing. Another drop here, a big one, is CMC from 9 to 21. This is always the problem with CMC when you're investing in him, is if he gets an injury like this, he plummets in value because of the age. I will say this, if this year has taught us anything, is that don't put too much stock into age, put more stock into how good the player is. If we don't see the player falling off, and just because they're getting older, but we don't start seeing that fall off, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Saquon Barkley is the QB1 this year, right? Saquon Barkley is the RB1 this year. You know, he'll be 28 this coming year. Derrick Henry is over 30 years old. Alvin Kamara, right, an older running back, is the RB3. Joe Mixon, RB6, an older running back. Even guys like there was a couple. James Conner, he's a top 15 guy. Aaron Jones is 17 in total points. CMC, I think, is just different, right? I'm not too worried about his age necessarily. He will be 29 next year. I still think CMC can be a top 5 running back next year, no problem. And that's all I really care about for running backs. What can you do for me in the next season? I don't care about beyond that because the running back market is way too volatile. What I'm saying is I think CMC is a buy low later in the offseason, not now, later in the offseason for a contending team. Javonte Williams from 35 to 43. Man, gone are the days of Javonte Williams being the RB1 overall. I'm very curious with Javonte. I think he's definitely not on the Broncos next year. He's RB28 in points per in total points in PPR, RB34 in points per game. So he's really kind of insignificant. I am curious with Javonte though, like if he gets on another team and they really commit to him being the guy, can he be something? Right? I don't think he's just like dead and gone. The guy's still only 24 years old. He'll be 25 heading into next year, right? It feels like Javonte, he's been in the league since 2021. He came in at a young, I think 21 years old or maybe 20 years old. No, I think it was 21. So like he's still very, very young, which is kind of surprising. You know, Javonte, if I can pull it up here, is younger than guys like Ray Davis. I just saw that pop up. He's younger than Rico Dowdle, younger than Jalen Warren. He's about the same age as Isaac Guerrero. He's younger than Rashad White. So, you know, he's younger than a lot of these guys, younger than Ramondre, Etienne, Swift. You know, I don't know if these are shocking or not, but Tyrone Tracy, he's younger than Tyrone Tracy. Like he's younger than Brian Robinson. Like he's younger than a lot of these Pacheco, Chase Brown. Like he's a young player, and yeah, he hasn't been very good lately. He averages 3.6 yards per attempt the last 2 years with the Broncos, right? But then I asked myself, like, who has been really good with the Broncos lately? I know Jaleel McLaughlin has a better yards per carry and stuff like that. You know, Audric Estime does as well. But I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, does he get so low, Javonte, to where he gets into the sneaky buy territory? Like RB43, like I'm willing to pivot off maybe a top, you know, an RB28 or something. You give me a second round pick and in Javonte, and I think Javonte could have a bounce back season next year, depending on who he goes to. Last one here is J.K. Dobbins from 24 to 31. Obviously, with the injury, this is another one where like it was one injury away from his value just plummeting. Now it's not a season-ending injury. He should be back, especially if they make the playoffs, which would be good to see. One thing I will say about the Chargers situation and Dobbins in general, I don't think. Let me double check here. Is Dobbins under contract next year? I don't know if he is. No, he's not. So I'm curious to see what the Chargers do here. Do they sign him or not? Even if they do sign him, I think it's inevitable. The Chargers are going to bring in a running back through the draft, most likely. There's too many running backs to not draft this year that I think they need someone else. So I like selling on Dobbins for whatever value I can. He's been good this year. He had a solid year, but you kind of thank you for the services and you kind of sell on him if you can. And problem is, I just don't know if you can because I don't think rebuilders want him, and obviously contenders don't want him right now when he's on the IR. Into some receivers here, DK Metcalf falling here from wide receiver 13 to wide receiver 20. Man, DK is just an interesting player. We know how good DK Metcalf is. It just hasn't really materialized since that second year when he was a beast and he was the Dynasty wide receiver 1. Middle of his second year, he had 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns, and everyone was saying he's the best young receiver in the NFL. Since then, his best season, he's had 967 yards, 12 touchdowns, good season. 1048 and 6 touchdowns, 1,108 touchdowns, never had more than 90 catches. This year he has, in 10 games, 76 yards, 763 yards, 3 touchdowns. So the touchdowns aren't there. The catches have never been there for DK. He's basically averaging 5 catches a game. So he's on pace for 85 catches and 85 catches and 1,300 yards, which is actually, if he played a full season, that's not what he's on pace for now, but if he played a full season. So like he's still good when he's playing. I just don't know if he's ever going to get to the level of like top 12 receiver again. He might, but I think this is a little bit justified where he is. I think we should be valuing him as like a wide receiver 2 with that upside each and every week. So Zay Flowers, another interesting one from wide receiver 14 to wide receiver 18. Zay Flowers is another one where like he's kind of like Jordan Addison for me, where I'm not 100% sure like what is his ceiling exactly. What is Zay Flowers' ceiling? We see big games, 7 for 115, 5 for 127, and then he just kind of disappears. 4 for 34, 2 for 39, 5 for 62, 3 for 74. Those are fine games, but they're not elite games. I don't necessarily think it's his fault. I think it's more the product of like the Ravens and their offense, right? But Zay Flowers, I will say this, he is the wide receiver 10 in PPR in total points, but he's the wide receiver 31 in points per game. That is a huge drop off. I actually didn't know that until I just did that right now. Usually see like if they do drop off in terms of like total points versus points per game, you usually see maybe like a 5 to 8 position drop off. To go from total points in 2024, total points, he's the wide receiver 10, but average, he's the wide receiver 31. Which means, what is he? It's nice that he's staying healthy and he's giving you solid production, but is he really making a huge difference week in and week out? Like 11 points is not winning me weeks. I want guys that win me weeks. 11 points, 12 points, those aren't winning me weeks. And you just look at like his last 6 weeks and 10, 11, 11.9, 7.4, 29.7, 18.54, right? Like, I guess I want a little bit more, like give me 15 points per game rather than, a 10-point game, 3 weeks, and then a 28-point game, right? I don't know, but he's an interesting one. I do think he's a very talented player. I just don't know in Baltimore if he's ever going to get to that level of like being a top 12 receiver and a difference maker, like a true top 12 receiver in terms of points per game, right? Not just in total points. Devonta Smith has fallen, and this one makes sense as well because, he was injured and he hasn't been playing well this year. So Devonta Smith here this year is, let's see here. I'm just double checking where he's at in points. In total points, I believe he's wide receiver 30. No, in points per game, he's wide receiver 33. So, he's had some tough games, 0.8 points in one game. I think that game he may have left early. I still like Devonta Smith as a talent. I still think he's a really good player. Obviously, the Eagles have gone the path of like our strength is our offensive line and running the ball with Saquon and Jalen Hurts, right? And so that brought down the volume a lot. So we've had some dud games from Devonta. 1 catch for -2 yards where he did play most of that game. But like you take out that game, and Devontae actually hasn't been that bad this year. I know you can't really take that game out because most people started him, but you just look at, I know lately he sucked, but here's his game log: 15.4, 20.6, 14.9, missed the game, bye week, 15.4, 0.8, 20.5, 18.7, and then the last 2 weeks, 3.4 and 6.9. He's really only had 3, and they've been really bad weeks, right? I still believe in Devontae. I still think he's a really good receiver. If he's going to be on the Eagles as the number 2 option, though, I think we kind of seen his ceiling to a certain extent. Like, I don't know if he's going to get much better than like a top 20 receiver, in total points and stuff like that. If he ever gets into a situation where he's on another team as the number 1 option or more of a passing team, which I don't know if they'll ever be with Jalen Hurts, then I think he's a smash play here. Jaden Reed, from 17 to 22, he just kind of continues to fall. And I was kind of telling people at the beginning of the year, and I obviously looked stupid when I was doing it because Jaden Reed was, I think the wide receiver 1 overall after the first 5 weeks or whatever he was. Let's actually see what he was. After the first 5 weeks, Jaden Reed was, the wide receiver 5 in total points. And I looked stupid doing it, but I was basically saying, like, Jaden Reed does not play. He does not play a lot, like in terms of what we expect from a starting top 10 wide receiver or whatever in points per game. He doesn't play as much as those other people, right? Generally, people who are playing the snap share that he's playing aren't going to be consistent in terms of fantasy football production. And I had to pause because I wanted to look it up, but basically, since the year 2000, there's only been 10 players who put up over 1,000 receiving yards that played less than 65% of their team's total snaps. And I don't know if a lot of those players, that just shows total. So a lot of those players could have put over 1,000 yards and missed games, right? They could have definitely missed games and stuff like that. So what I'm trying to get at here is basically, sorry, I thought I had to sneeze. And again, I had to pause. But anyways, I wanted to look at, which of those players kind of played a full season and were playing less than 65% of their snaps. Tyreek Hill, Nico Collins from last year were a couple of those guys. They did miss a game or 2 here and there. And Chris Olave, Lance Moore, they were a couple more. But really, like, if you are not playing 65% of your team's snaps, it's hard to be a consistent fantasy option. And we see that play out with Jaden Reed now in the second half of the season. So I'm curious to see like how the Dynasty community is going to react if he doesn't finish strongly. I'm very, very curious. I'm very, very curious. So Deebo Samuel from keeptradecut 31 to 41. Man, I can't really explain what's happening with Deebo, to be honest. I really can't explain it. It's unfortunate. It sucks, but he's just not good. He's just not good this year. Like, only 38 catches, 531 yards. He's not really rushing the ball efficiently. 27 attempts for 79 yards. He's not getting touchdowns, only 2 touchdowns this year. This last stretch here is going to be really, really important for Deebo. Like, if he continues what he's doing this year, his value is going to plummet. He might not even be on the 49ers anymore, which will be interesting to see how another team uses him. If he finishes strong, though, people are going to buy back into Deebo. So very curious to see how this ends, and we will revisit Deebo in early January. Tank Dell from 27 to 32. I will say I feel like Tank Dell is going to become a buy low in the offseason unless he goes off, this last 5 weeks or so, or in the playoffs if they make the playoffs. And the reason I say that is because we got to remember that Tank Dell had a broken leg, the same injury that Tony Pollard had. And if you remember, Tony Pollard got that in the playoffs of the 22 season, or the last game of the very end of the 22 season. Came back, started from week 1 in the 23 season. And remember, Tony Pollard was a disappointment in the 2023 season, right? We were like, oh my God, it's all him. No Zeke. He's going to be awesome because he was super efficient with Zeke in 2022. And so 2023, it was just him. And Tony Pollard was kind of a disappointment last year. And he said it wasn't until like week 12 that he finally felt right and healthy. And from that point on, he was, I think, PFF's most highest graded rusher. And then we look at this year, and Tony Pollard has been awesome this year, right? A year removed from that injury. Mark Andrews also had that injury kind of late in the season, right? Mark Andrews, or kind of middle to late. Mark Andrews has had that leg injury, has not been as good as we thought this year. Tank Dell had that injury pretty late last year, and he's been a disappointment. He also got shot, by the way. Don't forget that. So what I'm trying to say is I really wouldn't be surprised if this whole Texans offense and Tank Dell bounce back next year. And remember, it's not like CJ Stroud's having this amazing year. If CJ Stroud was going off and Tank Dell was doing nothing, I'd be a little bit more concerned, but he's not. CJ Stroud is averaging 240 passing yards and less than a touchdown a game. So it's not like CJ Stroud's having this amazing year as well. So I believe in Tank Dell, and if he continues to fall, I will be buying low on him. A couple more guys here. Kyle Pitts from 4 to 6. I don't know, man. Like Kyle Pitts, like, would I be surprised if Kyle Pitts in the next few years has an amazing year? I wouldn't, but I'm done kind of banking on it at this point. That being said, he was solid when Kirk Cousins is playing solid, but I don't know. Can another team better utilize Kyle Pitts' skill set? Maybe, but I'm done buying into him. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if he does have a big year, and if he does fall to like tight end 12 or 15, maybe I'll buy low on him. But if he continues to be like a top 7, 8 guy, I'm not going to be in on Kyle Pitts. I'm not. I'm sorry. Dalton Kincaid from 6 to 7. The tight end market hasn't been moving. So I just kind of chose guys I wanted to talk a little bit about. Kincaid falling a little bit. This is what we got to be careful when we start crowning these guys as like, oh my God, this tight end is going to be the focal point of this offense. There's not many tight ends in the history of the NFL that are the focal points of offenses. Obviously, you have guys like Kelsey. We have guys like Andrews back in 2021, was it? George Kittle and stuff like that. But it takes a different type of player. And so just keep that in mind. And until you actually see it happening, I don't think we got to be careful just crowning these guys. Can Kincaid still be a good, solid player? Of course he can. Is he going to be that difference-making tight end? I don't necessarily think so. I don't think he will. So it's a bummer. Can he have a couple good seasons here and there? Sure, but I just don't know if he's going to be like the difference-maker Kelsey that we all expected. And then Evan Ingram from 13 to 16. The Jags have been just a disappointment in general. I will say this: if they get a good offensive coach in there, I'm going to start buying back into the Jags. So, and Evan Ingram, I think, is going to be a big part of that. If someone can turn the Jags around and make Trevor Lawrence, a really good NFL quarterback, then, guys like Brian Thomas and Evan Ingram are only going to benefit from that. So I appreciate everyone watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. We'll be putting out a lot of Dynasty content. So catch you guys all very, very